I think she thought she was a weak candidate. She obviously looked back to the 2020 race where Harris couldn't even make it really to into the thick of the primary. And she also wasn't, I think most Democrats didn't feel like she was kind of a weakened vice president. She wasn't elevated by the Biden administration. We kind of go into this in the book that she felt a little undermined by a lot of people inside the administration, that they didn't do a good job in elevating her. And so she kind of carried those insecurities with her. But I think it's really interesting how, and then you have also Biden's people kind of sabotaging her and telling donors, for example, that Kamala Harris couldn't be the nominee, that she wasn't strong enough to be the nominee. So that was another fight that was playing out.
So
They
you
tried
write.
to save Biden. Oh, I'm sorry, Tara. I
No,
was just
no,
going to say that they tried to save Biden. His team tried to save Biden, tried to make sure that he could breathe, that he could keep his head above water by trying to drown Kamala Harris in the weeks between the debate and when Biden actually got out. So for 3.5 weeks, she's taking hits behind the scenes from Biden's closest advisors. And by the way, some of them are dumb enough to have sent messages, like electronic messages that have been preserved. So, we were able to go back. We chose not to quote directly from some of the messages. We were able to go back and basically write what the basic content of those messages were to donors, to other allies, basically saying, if you keep pushing on Joe Biden, you're going to end up with Kamala Harris, and she's a total catastrophe and can't win. This is the president of the United States and his team just kneecapping the vice president, who, for I think most of us, it was clear all along that this was likely to end up in her hands as the candidate, and they're just doing all this damage to her for weeks and weeks internally.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we got to talk about some juicy drama details from inside the Democrat Party, specifically the White House and the Kamala Harris campaign going into the 2024 election, because Democrat operative Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes have wrote a book about what happened leading up to the election, Kamala Harris losing the election to President Trump. Okay, starting with what happened with Joe Biden after the CNN debate and the calls for him to drop out. And at that point, it was kind of open season against Joe Biden, because now you had sitting Democrat Congress members and Democrat leaders basically floating their candidate, right, to replace Joe Biden. And Kamala Harris was not a top candidate among some of the leadership in the Democrat Party. In fact, some people in the Democrats, they wanted Gretchen Whitmer. However, the blacks, right, the blacks of the Democrat Party said, no, it has to be Kamala Harris because she is a black woman, allegedly.
Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi want to win in this open primary? I mean, they must have had someone in mind.
That's a great question. Obama loved the governors, generally speaking, and we were told that he had a particular affinity for Gretchen Whitmer.
Okay.
Thought that she would be a good person. Whitmer, interestingly, had been floated, right after the debate as somebody, and actually during the hours of the debate, in a congressional women's caucus text chain. Hillary Scholten, the freshman from Michigan, while the debate's going on, text to the rest of the group, Whitmer for president. And then a bunch of CBC members on the same text thread start pushing back.
Congressional Black Caucus members.
Yeah, Congressional Black Caucus members start pushing back and say it's got to be Kamala Harris. This is like on debate night. No one's defending Joe Biden. They all think he's got to go. But suddenly you see this kind of white-black fault line break open in this text chat. Whitmer, her name is surfacing online, and Democratic leaders are talking about her, and she actually calls Kamala Harris, a few days after the debate, and basically says, "Look, I'm not running for president. I'm not competing with you." Such a fascinating time with all of these people knifing each other in the back.
Okay, in which apparently you had Biden's team working behind the scenes to undermine Kamala Harris, okay, because I guess Kamala was eyeing that spot, right? They were eyeing who is going to take over for Joe Biden. Everybody remembers that at that point after the CNN debate, the Democrats came out and told the truth about how Biden's not mentally fit. He's not cognitively capable of serving anymore, after gaslighting the American people for years about his declining mental condition. And again, apparently Joe Biden really didn't want to go, right? He didn't want to go so bad that, again, he was undermining Kamala Harris, okay? And one of the ways that he undermined Kamala Harris, even after she eventually ended up getting the nomination and his endorsement, is by telling Kamala Harris, hey, there's no daylight between me and you, aka you can't come out here and say anything negative about me and my administration, which kind of explains the reason why Kamala Harris, when confronted about what are the differences between you and Joe Biden, right, aka are you going to distance yourself from Joe Biden, she refused to do so. Take a look.
If anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Were there any stipulations for this Biden endorsement? Like, did Harris have to do anything to get it?
We're not aware of any stipulations. I mean, other than beg him to make it fast, right? Like, and this is, so for Biden, it's kind of an FU, kind of a middle finger to Barack Obama. And we go deep in this book into the relationships between him and Obama and how like frayed that is, and his terrible, like what had been a great relationship with Pelosi that turns into this terrible relationship. But, ultimately Biden would have looked silly telling the country that someone other than his vice president was the best person to be president. It would have looked ridiculous. Right.
And I'm guessing, though, that endorsement, there was an understanding that there would be no daylight between them, right?
Yeah. I mean, so that was an understanding that carried throughout their relationship. But what's interesting is it's different when he's telling her no daylight and she's his vice president. The vice president's not supposed to have daylight from the president. But he continued to tell her that after that handoff, and she's the candidate, and he's pretending like she still works for him. And she does as vice president, but not as a candidate. She's the hope of the Democratic Party. They're telling everybody the Republic is going to fall if Donald Trump is president. And Joe Biden's like, I don't want her to make me look bad by doing what she needs to do to win, which is to provide some daylight. And she continues to listen to him. He'd been telling her this for years as vice president. Interestingly, in 2008, Joe Biden, as a vice presidential candidate, hammered the hell out of John McCain, who's Barack Obama's opponent, by saying there was no daylight between McCain and the then President George W. Bush. So he knows how powerful that idea is at hamstringing a candidate who has a president of the same party in office.
God.
Yeah. So again, this is extremely fascinating stuff. This confirms everything that we already knew. We already knew at the time in which it was happening, because it was clear and obvious there was a civil war going on in the Democrat Party, right? Because the Democrat Party is a party of narcissists, right? These are people who feel entitled and they're doing whatever they can for power, right? And this is part of the reason why I don't think I could ever be a politician, is because of stuff like this. Right. This is why I'm just kind of like, nah, I'm not sure if being a politician is for me. But who knows? Maybe one day. I'm just saying that stuff like this it shows you what a lot of these politicians are in it for. Right. They're in it for themselves. OK, Joe Biden was so prideful that he didn't allow Kamala Harris to freely admit that, hey, our administration is bad, that we made mistakes. And that's part of the reason why Kamala Harris lost, is because she refused to acknowledge the reality that, one, again, the administration is bad, that they made mistakes, which did not give her an opportunity to talk about how she would fix the mistakes, how she would be different. And I think that's one of the main reasons why she lost. It's because she could not clearly articulate if there was a difference between her and Joe Biden. And if there is, then what would she do differently? I mean, the easy one would have been the border, right? But she couldn't even be straight with the American people about the current state of the border because she didn't want to make Biden look bad, right? And herself, because she was the border czar at the time, right? So she also would have looked bad, which, I mean, by the way, think about the current border czar, Tom Homan versus Kamala Harris, right? I mean, the difference is night and day. So, it's just hilarious to me because the egos of these individuals is part of the reason why the Democrats collapsed, okay? And apparently, going into the election, Kamala Harris thought that she had a real shot at winning. Okay, even though she was gaslighting the country on basically everything, including the polls, right? For whatever reason, she thought she had a chance to win. And when Trump won, Kamala Harris apparently was dumbfounded, right? Her and Tim Walz were shocked, They were shocked, which, by the way, Tim Walz is also coming out and saying that, well, he told Kamala Harris that he was a liability, right? Like, before he was picked, he told Kamala Harris, hey, I'm not that great, right? I tend to say stupid things, right? I tend to put my foot in my mouth a lot. And she picked him anyways, which really shows you the judgment of Kamala Harris, right? That she's not a very good judge of, somebody's capabilities, right? Because clearly she picked somebody that was the male version of her, and she needed somebody that was basically the exact opposite of her. That's what she needed, but she literally picked the worst guy possible. So yeah, apparently they were dumbfounded when Trump won.
Why do you want people to read the book? The first sell is the shock that the ticket Walz and Harris felt on election night. What do you know?
Well, we know that they were shocked, completely surprised by the events that unfolded on election night. They thought they were going to win. And, when they were told that they were losing in the final hours and that they had lost, there was complete silence and shock, and they were just dumbfounded by what was happening. But, Chris, I think people should read this book because John and I are journalists in the truest sense. We call balls and strikes. We are not one-sided. This is a book that Democrats can learn from. This is a book that Republicans will enjoy because you can watch the train wreck. Everyone gains from reading this book.
I like the sell. The role of Biden, Amy, there are two schools. One is he was resistant to the change and stayed resistant throughout. The second was he was resistant to the change, and then he said, all right, I'm going out, but it's going to be Harris. And that he didn't want a primary. What did you find out?
Yeah. Well, so we know that there is a secret meeting going on in the final minutes before President Biden drops out at the time. It's at the Naval Observatory. It's in Kamala Harris's pool house there. Her advisors, her closest advisors are gathered, and they're talking about what happens when and if Joe Biden drops out. We find out that he does drop out there, and one of her aides rushes in to be with her. Biden doesn't want to immediately endorse her. He wants to kind of let the moment sink in and then endorse her a couple of days later. And she says, no, I need your endorsement right now.
Do you believe which story do you believe more? That the Pelosi and the party said it has to be Harris, or that Biden wanted to pick who it would be?
I think that Pelosi and the party, they were very squeamish on Harris going in. We have reporting in the book that says he goes, she goes. I think they wanted, a lot of people wanted a primary, and but it was a little too late for that.
Yeah, I had a guy trying to convince me that it was Obama and Ron Klain had picked them. Now, what did you find out about Obama's role in this?
Obama was very quiet, obviously, but he was talking to Nancy Pelosi. We found out there were a couple of calls happening within those 24 days. He was, trying to take the pulse of people. He was in listening mode, too. He was talking to his former partner and asking what his plan was. And so he was very involved, but behind the scenes. You didn't see him so much. And in this book, we report what was exactly happening.
Yeah, and I had heard what you have here, that Obama had floated the governor of Michigan and the governor of Maryland. And when I heard that at the time, Whitmer and Westmore, I thought they should have flipped it, or I thought it should have been Shapiro and he. But of course, that's what would have happened if they played out the process. Did you get any particular insight into what made the short primary or the open convention an impossibility?
It was just too short of a time frame. And, President Obama was calling people at the time. He called people like Jim Clyburn to find out where he was. Jim Clyburn knew that call was coming, and he said, OK, I have to quickly get behind Kamala Harris. And that's sort of how that unfolded. And I think President Obama rather wanted to kind of see how this all unfolded. He didn't want his finger on the pulse, but he also didn't think that Kamala Harris could win.
Wow. So basically, we're being told a story that we already knew, right? We don't need to be insiders, right, to know that, okay, this is what happened, right? It was obvious considering what was happening at the time. Obama and Pelosi and all of them, they staged a coup against Joe Biden, right? They pushed him out, okay? And Joe Biden decided that, you know what? He's going to pick the Democrat Party nominee by endorsing Kamala Harris, closing the door on a primary, which is something that Obama and Pelosi and others wanted, right? Because they didn't want Kamala Harris. Nobody wanted Kamala Harris. Even Biden didn't want Kamala Harris. But he knew that that was the only path, right, for him, okay? And basically, he ended up undermining Kamala Harris from the get-go, because Kamala could not come out here and to talk bad about the administration, so she had to gaslight the American people on the administration, and she couldn't really explain exactly how she would be different, because at the end of the day, she had to go out there and say that, hey, me and Biden are the same, and that you're going to get more of the same, and that was just not a winning message, considering how people were fed up with the Biden administration. So, you know, it's just pretty hilarious to think about how the Democrats got themselves into this problem. Right now, fast forward 2 to 3 months into President Trump's second administration, the Democrats are in complete and total chaos, right? They have no leadership whatsoever, okay? They are letting the far left wing of their party basically take over because they have no direction. So they are doubling and tripling down on exactly why they lost, right? On the things that led the Democrats to losing, they're saying, no, let's do more of that, right? Tim Walz is saying we need to be more woke. We need to have more open borders, right? We need to embrace more of the insanity that led to them losing in the first place. I mean, it's really fascinating stuff, okay? The time that we're living in from a political perspective. Historians are going to look at this time and say, wow, there was some very fascinating things happening at this point in our politics. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in regards to the direction that the Democrat Party is going to go in. But in my opinion, I think as of right now, it doesn't look like it's going to go in a good direction for them in the long term. But we'll see. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.